interrupting programmes to tell you that Diana, Princess of Wales, is gravely ill. The couple were apparently being pursued by paparazzi on motorbikes.
Still sealed off. You have the flashing.
Seeing the debris at the moment, Stephen.
That's the car. Darren confirmed reports suggest he has concussion.
Police say the Press Association, a short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death.
I have a terrible feeling that this is true.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris.
I saw Diana the person, not Diana the princess.
I think she was looking for love, and as she had been rejected so many times over, it had left her spirit desolate.
Just recently in England, she was voted the second most famous Briton ever.
I don't remember anybody ever being like Diana, where the whole world was just, they couldn't get enough about her.
She was very much aware that as a princess, she had power.
She relieved the suffering, she relieved the sick, she relieved the handicap, you know, it's a tremendous gift, you know, she have.
The royal family never understood was how to handle the press.
Hello, I'm Joan Collins, and thank you for joining us. What you're about to see is an exceptional tribute to the beautiful English Rose who was so sadly taken from us. During this program, we'll explore the real Princess of Wales, her care for the poor, for children in need, and her deep spiritual relationship with the world. I had the privilege of meeting Princess Diana in person on several occasions, and I was struck by her unique personality. So I'm going to share with you some of my recollections and thoughts. In order to get a clearer picture of who the real Diana was, the Diana that surfaced only in the comfort of trusted friends, we've asked a few of the people closest to her to tell us more about this fascinating lady.
Diana never gave me any instruction whatsoever about how to treat her, except for one thing.
Astrologer and author Penny Thornton.
I had been given the information before I arrived that I was to curtsy and to say, "Good morning, Your Royal Highness." And the minute I said that and did that, she said, "Oh, please don't do that, just call me Diana."
However bad the day had been, she always maintained her sense of humour.
Andrew Morton, author of Diana, Her True Story.
And it was always a self-deprecating sense of humour, and it was never unkind, never cutting. It was always friendly and pleasant. And that's what I always liked about her, that however bad it had been, she would, at the end of the day, start smiling.
We've all read what Princess Diana was like, but the tabloids are often unkind to celebrities, and this was especially true of the Princess of Wales.
But she made sure that she knew what the tabloids were doing, and she knew that it was a two-way street.
She said, "That's me surrounded by 2,500 photographers."
She knew how to work the cameras. Now, paparazzi, of course, we've all heard the stories of how they can be very, very annoying, and they can at times be very oppressive.
And she said, you know, the old adage of spot the balls, this is spot the Diana.
All right, what about not breaking the law? What about just being annoying? Well, unfortunately, there's no law against being annoying. And paparazzi can be annoying.
She often said, "I would love to walk down the streets of Paris on my own without being recognised." And that was what she always wanted.
We went out and they're just so many photographers. You'd think they'd have something better to do with their lives.
We need pictures. And Diana knew this, and she knew it was a power that she had because, of course, she was more than just a public figure. She was a beautiful figure. She was gorgeous. She looked great on camera.
All the way through her adult life, she'd been like a prisoner in an open prison. She'd been followed by the paparazzi, by the police, and by the press, and by the public. Everything she did was watched and criticised.
And Diana took control of it very effectively.
She had that kind of magnetism that just fascinated everyone, and everyone fell under her spell. You couldn't help being fascinated by her. Someone said after her death, "We won't see the likes of her pass this way again."
I don't think Diana tried to escape from anything in her life except the press.
She just wanted to be anonymous.
Her father was a great friend of mine. I know him for a long time ago, and I know Diana when she was a child. And she always bring her over here and buy her toys, buy her clothes. As when her mother left her, she was really completely lost, as a child, 6 years old, when you have your mother walk away. You have a brother and another 2 sisters. It's very difficult, for a child to lose the most important part, of your lifehood, But the father was a great father, really. He looked after her and just, I think she was really basically missing nothing. And her relation with her mother was non-existent at all, because if you are a mother and you leave your kid, you don't care about your children. First, at all, she have no relation whatsoever with the mother. She's very spiritual, very great believer in God. And her life basically always for good causes, for things which she can believe. She relieved the suffering, she relieved the sick, she relieved the handicapped. It's a tremendous gift, she have. And I think this is the way, because, as I say, in spite she come from aristocracy, but she was very, very nicely brought up, and not spoiled. And this give her the touch of real, how she see other people suffering, how she see the poor, which they can look after their kids, that they can't get their children to hospitals, they can, all these humanitarian causes which relieve suffering, whatever the cause is. And her believing God and her spiritual, inside as a person, all the time she asked guidance from psychic, from people who really seeing the futures, all this type of things. She a great believer on that.
Diana, the person, was very different from Diana, the image. The image was this very glossy, glamorous individual. Well, she was.
I think Princess Diana took the very best of fashion. It was never anything gimmicky or very peculiar, but her evening clothes were magnificent always. And I think that she got herself in a little bit of trouble because she started wearing Paris fashions and everything, and I think the English industry, they told her to please wear English designers' clothes.
But the Diana in private was someone who would wake up in the morning full of beans and then by lunchtime feeling very down. I think you've got to see Diana in the 1980s as a woman who was lost. She felt alone, she felt neglected, she felt that the whole royal system was against her. She felt almost like a prisoner of the palace, and her marriage was going nowhere. She suspected that Prince Charles was seeing the other woman in his life, Camilla Parker Bowles, and those suspicions proved to be absolutely accurate. And in that kind of dark place, she turned to all kinds of people, astrologers, psychics, clairvoyants, all kinds of new age therapists, for some kind of answer.
She said, I've been to see somebody else for a therapy that's supposed to be really good, and they strap fossils on your legs. I said, since when was fossils that are millions of years old a step forward? That's going back a hell of a long time. I said, you either progress or you regress. You can't have it both ways.
Penny Thornton was one of the first astrologers that Diana consulted, and I think she came at a time when Diana was going through what she called the Dark Ages, and at a stage when she really needed some consolation and a real sense of self.
The first meeting with Diana was, and still obviously lives in my memory, etched very strongly. Diana was a Sun Cancerian, and Cancer is a very motherly, nurturing, creative, a little manipulative, sidestepping kind of sign. Her moon was in the sign of Aquarius, which gave us a much more kind of sparky and quirky side to her nature. It also revealed how interested she was in humanitarian issues. In fact, it was the moon in Aquarius that made her very emotionally unstable.
From our own research, there are as many as 5 attempted suicides. Diana tried to kill herself. Whether there were 5 or 3 or 2 or 1, who knows? But I mean, there were, by our count, at least 2.
And during that time that we were together and the subsequent time, one of the things that we really did discuss was the idea that her suffering was great, and that one of the ways to deal with that is to go out and help people who are suffering.
She developed bulimia nervosa. She was becoming a wreck, but yet she held it together. She held it together. The woman was strong.
Her spiritual interest was a quest for understanding and knowledge, that it was difficult for her to perhaps gain enough of that knowledge and wisdom to be able to turn aspects of her life around. Well, she was too young. I mean, she didn't have long enough.
I think that her astrological readings gave her an awful lot of comfort and a source of strength.
In 1936, Edward, the King of England, gave up the throne to be with the woman he loved. After his abdication, he retained the title Duke of Windsor, and he and the twice-divorced American socialite Wallis Simpson moved into the Windsor estate in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris. Una Toffolo, an acupuncturist and natural healer, was asked to care for the former monarch in his final days.
That was in Paris in 1972, and it was February, and I was asked by the American hospital to come and look after the Duke of Windsor. I said, no, I can't look after him. I'm Irish, he mightn't like me. And I said, no, you come at 6 o'clock. And when I arrived, he was lying on top of the bed. He was a very modest man, extremely present to everybody, and present and pleasant. Very considerate. He never passed through the door before a woman, whoever the woman was. And the same at table, because I was often invited to eat with him, and he was always served last. He was absolutely amazing. What a man. Born before his time, and I lived with him for about 3 months in the Bois de Boulogne after his operation.
Many believe that Dodi and Diana were on their way there when the accident occurred. Panicked by the amazing number of paparazzi around them, it might have seemed a better hideaway than Dodi's flat.
She was planning to stay in the Windsor Palace in Paris, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, which is being given to me by President Chirac.
If the story that Diana and Dodi were considering marriage is true, this house would have almost certainly been their Paris home. It's a graceful 19th century villa of 14 rooms surrounded by a large tree-filled garden. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor were given the home for their lifetime by the city of Paris and moved in 1953. The home became famous, and the King of England, Edward VII, lived there until his death. Then, by a strange coincidence, Mohammed El Fayed took a 50-year lease on the home, and through her association with Dodi Fayed, Diana became familiar with the royal house.
I restored it again back to its own glory, and she loved the house. It's in the center of Bois de Boulogne, and she was planning to live there.
Diana was fascinated by the handwritten biography of the Duchess of Windsor. I think it is indeed a remarkable coincidence that the Duchess described in detail how in the 1930s she had travelled to the house in the trunk of a car to avoid photographers who were in hot pursuit. Even more poetic is the coincidence that Una Toffolo, who cared for the Duke of Windsor and was the only person with him at the Paris estate when he died, would later be called upon to treat and became a confidant of Princess Diana.
It was Diana herself who telephoned me on, I think it was about the 5th of September, 1989, I think, and asked me would I come and look after her or see her. And that's where our trip started.
I think Diana empathised very much with Una because Una has a very spiritual sense of life and a very caring sense of the value of people, the dignity of life.
Diana was a predestined soul.
One could say that anybody that marries the future King of England and has a life on such a global platform as Diana had to have had a powerful destiny. If we believe in such things, then she had a destiny. And we would say that she fulfilled her destiny.
There are not very many people in the world that mesmerize the entire world.
She's one of the most famous women of all time. Just recently in England, she was voted the second most famous Briton ever.
She was gorgeous. She looked great on camera. Women were just dying to see pictures of Princess Diana, how she was dressed.
Her chart does have grace and dignity and all those things. And she worked with the tools she had and suffered from the complexes that she had.
I think Jackie Onassis, or Jacqueline Kennedy, I think she had that effect.
When she was single, Diana was effectively the Jackie Onassis of the 1990s, in the same way that Jackie O found it very difficult to find a man after the death of President Kennedy. Similarly, Diana found it very difficult to find any kind of romance with anyone who would take her on almost, because anyone who was in any way interesting had to have the money and the wherewithal to be able to keep her into the style to which she'd become very much accustomed. And Dodie certainly fell into that category.
Here's a guy who has money that can rival the royal family. I mean, they're on a big yacht, bigger than anything the royal family has. They could buy anything. I mean, they own the Ritz in Paris and so forth. And it was kind of exciting. It was getting exciting again. It was, oh gosh, look at Diana, the fairy princess again, being chased by one of the most eligible bachelors in the world.
The astrologers predicted that she would remarry. They predicted that she would probably remarry a foreigner. And so this whole relationship with Dodi, Fayed, because he was a foreigner, and the countries Paris and Italy often came up in these predictions. Ironically, Diana was always looking for a summer place to take her boys, William and Harry, because Kensington Palace is no good for children, for growing children in the summer. And her brother, Charles, had turned down her request for a house on the Althorpe estate. In the summer, she tended to go from one host to another.
Her own brother refused her to spend the summer holiday in her father mentioned the house she grew up. Why? He said, I need my privacy. I don't want, if you come, there will be a lot of paparazzi. I don't need any trouble. You can't come.
Diana had to deal with, of course, the paparazzi. She was followed by the paparazzi just as many stars are.
This is why she asked me to come with me to the holiday. I say, you're most welcome.
You can think of Diana at almost any stage of her life, and she is fascinating. We, in this country, think of her as a commoner. She was far from a commoner. I mean, her whole family had been, ladies in waiting, and they were always around sort of the royals.
She come from time to time, to talk to me about her problems, to give her advice as much as you can, because I'm a father and I have 4 kids. I know without a family, it's difficult to bring up children, And it happened just she was here in one of the charitable function, which had been given here in Harrods, and she was the guest of honor. And she was sitting on my table. And this was before summer. She told me, where are you going in summer? I say, going to my house in Thousand, France. I say, why you ask me? Say, I have nowhere to go. Can I come with you? I say, of course. Can I bring the children with me? I say, of course. I send her my helicopter. She's going to pick her up from Kensington Palace. She came to my country house with the kids, And from there, left for a couple of weeks. She, enjoyed the company. She see the family life. It happened that Dodi was there by chance. He spent time in swimming, going out, water skiing, jet skiing.
And he invited her down and her boys down to his place in the south of France. And during that visit, she met Dodi. He was then with another girlfriend, but she was soon ditched.
It happened just they click, for no reason, You can't just make things happen, They met each other a long time, they've been together, But things which no one can control, And that's how the story started.
Saint-Tropez in the south of France is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and I try to spend as much time there as possible. Diana also appreciated its charm. In one of the trips that Diana and Dodi took to Saint-Tropez, they stopped into a little shop to have her portrait painted. That portrait would be the last one that Diana would ever sit for.
I
wrote an invitation, and I took it directly to the post office on July 16th. And on the 17th at midnight, who do I see coming in? Lady Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed, who came to my studio. I got chills because I was under the spell of her charm, and I was amazed that she was there. I didn't at all think that she would show up. Saint-Tropez has a great atmosphere, the yachts. Mr. Al-Fayed has a fantastic yacht. She'd walk around Saint-Tropez, go to the restaurants, eat with her future husband, maybe. She'd be with her children. She'd also go to nightclubs in the evening, a little bit on the sly.
The one thing you always knew about Princess Diana was she loved her children. She adored her children. You can't fake that. I mean, she just was ebullient when her kids were around. She'd splash around in the water and go to theme parks with them.
Often the way to Diana's heart was through her children, and any man who showed any kind of interest in the children found a shortcut to Diana's heart. And Dodi was a young man who liked children, showed an interest in William and Harry, went jet skiing with them, went swimming with them. Diana was very attracted to that.
She finds the safety and the happiness to be connected with Dodi. And Dodi was such a gentle person, very human, down to earth. And just, I can't believe that I lost him, you know. Very difficult, very difficult. Definitely, marriage was going to happen. Engagement ring was there. They choose their engagement ring together.
I think it was a wonderful summer romance for her. Whether that romance would have continued, because after all, they'd only been together for effectively 11 or 12 days, remains to be seen.
They're going to declare their engagement on Monday. The night their life been taken away.
There's always been great controversy about the events surrounding the death of Princess Diana. Was it the paparazzi chasing after her? Was it the speeding of the car she was in? Was it fate? Or was it something else? Conspiracy theories abound, but one thing is for certain. The world lost a very special person on that terrible day.
When Diana was killed, along with Dodi Fayed, in that tunnel, the first story was that, oh, the paparazzi killed her. That paparazzi were riding alongside the car, clicking pictures through the window, flashing lights and confusing everyone in the car. Now, that's ludicrous. The paparazzi didn't do it. That car, it was proven, and we all saw that wreckage, was doing 121 miles an hour when it crashed. You do not ride on a motorcycle at 121 miles an hour and turn and click photographs. Dodi Fayed would urge drivers to go faster, and one of his favorite games was outrunning the paparazzi. He did it constantly, and I have no doubt that he did it that night in the tunnel. It's very simple to evade paparazzi, and everybody who deals with them every day knows this. If they're chasing you in cars, all you have to do is slow down. Diana knew how to do all this, but with Dodi Fayed in that car, she didn't have a chance. By the time she embarked on this unfortunate affair with Dodi Fayed, who was a playboy, you could almost see the inevitability of it. Mohammed Al-Fayed maintains to this day, the royal family murdered Diana because they did not want to see her married to a Muslim.
89% of the people and ordinary people believe in all what I'm saying. My internet sites are jammed of support, you know. I have thousands of letters every day arriving, you know. Up till now, just give me this why I have the courage, you know, and the support of the ordinary people of this country, because they believe what happened, and exactly they support me in everything and every theory I'm explaining to them, to everywhere, you know.
He has pursued and kept alive this idea of a conspiracy theory. If he didn't have the money he had, it would be long since dead. We all know that there was no conspiracy that killed Diana. It was just a tragic accident brought on by Dodi Fayed and his insane need for speed and his love of running the paparazzi off on chases.
You can't just rest to accept just devastation, you know, of someone just snatch a child from you.
There are various theories about this romance with Dodi. One is that she was madly in love with him and that they were going to marry, and hence the appalled reaction of the British establishment, the prospect of a Princess of Wales marrying a Muslim. The other theory is that she was trying to get her own back on Hasnat Khan, a doctor, a heart surgeon that she'd fallen in love with, and she wanted to make him jealous. And she wanted to make him jealous by publicly parading this romance with Dodi.
I would consider that Dr. Khan was the person that she really fell in love with. Unfortunately, my husband was taken ill in 1995, and when Diana heard it, she wrote him a lovely letter and said, "I believe, and I'm so sorry to hear, that your heart is misbehaving." And from that day, she came every day to see Joseph. It was a total coincidence, Diana meeting Dr. Khan, because he had come into the little room where Diana had arrived to see Joseph 5 minutes before, and presented him to Diana. And that was a great moment when she actually said to me, "Isn't he lovely? He's dropped down dead gorgeous." And she was bitten, really, by that look of concern on Hasnat Khan's face. And he was such a great man.
If Diana would have been alive now, I'm pretty sure she would have ended up marrying Hasnat Khan. She loved him, he loved her. It was a 2-year relationship. And there is absolutely no evidence, well, all the evidence points to the fact that they would have got back together. While Diana was with Dodi, she phoned up Hasnat's family every single day. She still adored him, and she was with Dodi to make him jealous. Diana was a pure romantic, and she always said she'd have been very happy being Mrs. Hasnat Khan, even though I said to her, "You could never be plain Mrs. Khan. You will always be the mother of the future King of England."
My own view is that Diana tended to flit from one man to another in this constant quest for love, for happiness, for security. And if it hadn't been for that car crash, I think that Dodi now would be consigned to the annals of royal history.
She was 18 years old. She was still naive. She didn't know about life. She didn't know what was planned. Prince Charles, the Crown Prince, future king, you know, was excitement for her, you know. To accept it was basically arranged marriage, you know.
She, in 1981, married a prince in a fairy tale wedding. Now, that was the first moment when she leaped across the Atlantic and landed in the hearts of certainly American women in this country. There's no woman of that era who does not remember that wedding. Every woman saw Diana married to Charles, and it was just a fairy tale wedding.
Charles and Diana were deeply incompatible astrologically. And this is not to say that they couldn't have found love within there, which they clearly did, and that they couldn't have worked with what they got and had a long and happy marriage. The added problem they had with their relationship difficulties astrologically was the age gap that they had between them, because when Diana married, she was 19, 20, and Charles was 32, 33.
And even though Charles was hardly the dashing romantic figure, at the time he was still quite young, so he He did his bit. He dressed up in his uniform and had his sword and all of that.
That's a huge age gap at that time. It would not have mattered so much if Diana was 30 and Charles was 42. She'd have done a lot of living and growing and experiencing things and could have come into a marriage that may have had its pitfalls astrologically and otherwise, but could have worked with it better. But Diana, very, very young, very inexperienced, lots of things happening to her all at the same time, coming into royal life, being in the media spotlight.
Suddenly she was the fairy tale princess and the fairy tale marriage. And they had the big, you know, ceremony in the cathedral.
Charles, for his part, is not used or was not used to dealing with women who didn't know how to deal with life and act accordingly. He had been brought up with a mother and a grandmother who were the epitome of duty and stiff upper lip, and his girlfriends were always primed and on their best behavior, if you like, when he was with them, and he was absolutely not prepared.
Is there a woman alive who can't identify with a young woman suddenly at the mercy of her in-laws, her officious, overbearing in-laws, because that was precisely what was happening.
Although Princess Diana met Simone Simmons through a business contact, it wasn't long before the two formed a lasting friendship, and they met regularly for lunch or tea. Simone's is a unique perspective of a Diana that few ever got to see.
I was working at the Hale Clinic in London. The introductions were made. This is Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. This is Simone. And Diana just said, well, you can call me Diana. And I said, well, you can just call me Simone. And that's how it started. As a friend, oh, she's very capricious. Diana and I had a relationship, and I was the only one that I know of, and that most other people know of, that can speak to Diana very, very bluntly.
Many of these conversations would happen up to 3 times a week at this restaurant, the Café de Lency.
Simone, welcome back. Good
Hi,
to see
Tatiana.
you.
How are
Even
you?
if Princess Diana is not with you today, we're
Yes.
both welcome.
She used to love to see it. We used to go for acupuncture around the corner and then come in here for tea.
I know.
And it was her private time that not many people knew about. This is where Diana and I used to sit together. And she used to sit on this chair facing in, but she would wave to everybody in the kitchen, and she used to sign her autographs on serviettes.
The one thing that was beautiful about her is her aura. She would walk into a room and you knew that sunshine was there. It is really lovely.
Diana felt relaxed here. It was one place she could be herself, totally relaxed.
Ironically, it was these quiet moments in public that Diana enjoyed the most. The first time I met her was at a charity gala in Palm Beach. There were hundreds of photographers there, all snapping pictures of the young princess. When we were introduced, she asked me, "How do you stand it?" She was, of course, referring to the constant public attention, but the scrutiny was in many ways worse when she wasn't in public. The private residences of the royal family were so heavily scrutinized that Diana often felt she couldn't be herself. And the 3 residences are, of course, Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, and Windsor Castle.
She once invited tabloid journalists from the Mail, the Mirror, the Sun, one other paper, the 4 of them, to Kensington Palace way early in the marriage. What she did with the tabloid press was she knew they were a force, she knew they were a power, she knew they were fascinated with her, so what she did was she didn't turn them into friends per se, but they were not enemies either. She could use them, and the one thing that the royal family never understood was how to handle the press. They had 2 left feet when it came to handling the press, because up until this point they'd never had to.
For a more intimate look at Diana's life outside of public view, my friend and travel host Laura Mackenzie went to the beautiful grounds of Kensington Palace to speak with Diana's personal secretary, Louise Reed Carr.
The palace behind us, visitors can go in, but where did Princess Di actually live? Where were her apartments and where did you work?
Well, if I show you, as we turn around here, just to the left of those gates, there's a wing that you can't see behind the trees. And her office was underneath, her apartments were on the 1st floor. It was a beautiful layout and the apartments are stunning. And there are a number of rooms, actually. I think she had about 4 bedrooms, something like that, because there were so many little dressing rooms off here and there. So it was an amazing place. The lounge was fantastic, with a piano in for the princess to sit at and play.
Oh, gorgeous. But the public can't go in and see that, can they?
No, they can't.
Oh. And your office was right below?
Below, yes. We were right next door to the kitchens, but we were very beautifully decorated too. We were very lucky.
If you could tell me one little anecdote about Princess Di that's personal with you and she, what would that be?
Well, actually, I would say the first moment I met her at the palace here for my interview, I was really nervous, oh, so nervous, as anybody would be. And I had to walk up this great long flight of stairs. And as I got halfway up, the princess came charging down with her hand out saying, "Oh, Louise, thank you so much for coming to meet me." And I couldn't believe it. She was thanking me for coming to meet her. And I was there to actually see if I could get a job, you know. That was a really special thing about her. She made you feel like she was your friend.
Someone that I knew that worked at Kensington Palace said on Saturdays she would take the boys, they'd be in their Levi's and sneakers, and they would walk to the McDonald's and just like common people.
I'm delighted that a public playground is being named for Princess Diana in the gardens of Kensington Palace. I feel that Diana would have remembered Windsor Castle for one special reason, because Diana told Andrew Morton that the Prince of Wales proposed to her on the evening of February the 6th, 1981, in the nursery of Windsor Castle. It was from the white drawing room of Windsor Castle. The Queen made her traditional Christmas Day television broadcast and spoke about the tragic death of Diana. It was along the Mall, on her way to Buckingham Palace, that Diana and Prince Charles rode in an open carriage after their fairy tale wedding in 1981. 16 years later, her funeral procession would pass in front of this same palace, making its way through the silent streets and shocked crowds of London on its way to the service at Westminster Abbey.
Both Andrew and Sarah asked me if I would do Diana's chart for her. And at the time I was working on one of my books and I had a very tight deadline. So I said I would love to do her chart, but when I'd finished the book. And then suddenly, about 3 weeks later, the phone rang, and it was Diana herself who asked me if I would do her chart. And again, I refused, simply because of my deadline. But towards the end of the conversation, she said, "Oh, I just wanted to know if there's light at the end of the tunnel." And this was in 1986, when I, like everyone else, had only seen these beautiful images of Diana being happy with the children and Charles. So it came as a bit of a shock. So I said at that time, immediately, "I'll come straight away."
She would be seeing astrologers on a daily basis, often with Fergie, the Duchess of York.
The only friend she had, really, in the royal family was Fergie. They were pals for quite a while.
Because they were both in a desperate position. They both wanted out of the royal family. The astrologers were saying things were going to happen.
Our first consultation was in 1986, and I was with her for about 6 years. She developed a keen interest in astrology. She saw other astrologers, she saw other psychics, and they all fleshed out the picture for her. And I think she was able to make judgments on many things thanks to the astrology.
And I remember on one occasion, she came back from one reading, and they'd said, that the astrologer had said, a royal is going to die in a car crash in September. Well, that was in 1991. Diana, as we all know, died tragically in a car crash on August 31st, 1997. And when I read what she'd said, it kind of had the hair standing on the back of my neck, because there was this cockeyed accuracy about what the astrologers had predicted.
It isn't really surprising that Diana had such an interest in spiritual matters. I mean, the Spencer family as a whole were interested in spiritual things.
She comes from a very good line of spiritual people, because her great-uncle was a passionist priest.
When Lord Spencer suffered his stroke, rain and The family, in fact, used healers and believed strongly in the power of prayer, so this was not an unusual step to take.
She knew about spirituality and she had it within her, but she wanted to learn more about it. But not only spiritual, but also how to look at people and how to help them.
Diana was a really intuitive woman. She told me that when she was a little girl, she felt that she was in a different skin. And there's a couple of occasions during her childhood where she foretold events, when her father had a stroke, and also when she was dating Prince Charles and his horse died of a heart attack. On both occasions, she foretold what was about to happen. In fact, on several occasions, she spoke to a clairvoyant about some of the people who had meant an awful lot to her. And one of those was a bodyguard, a guy called Monarchy. He'd been killed in very suspicious circumstances. He'd been on the back of a motorbike and had been involved in a car accident around the time that inside the royal household there was suspicion that Princess Diana and her relationship with him was not all that it should be. So she wanted to know what had happened to him. She was also very concerned about her uncle, Lord Fermor, who had committed suicide when she was a teenager, and also about her grandmother, Cynthia Spencer, who, as she said to me, looked over her and looked after her from the spirit world. So she saw a clairvoyant to find out something about what had happened to them, to get some kind of what you Americans would call closure about what had happened to them. And from time to time, she saw these clairvoyants.
Just as Diana sometimes used clairvoyance to guide her life, we asked world-renowned psychic Craig Hamilton Parker to go with us to Dodi Fayed's London apartment and see if there were any lingering memories of Diana still there.
Wow. Such a lot of sadness in the family pictures. You can see he was close to his father. The magazines he would have read, the sweets. I see he likes lollipops. And his father on one side of the room, and on the other, Diana. And toys. Toy aeroplanes, toy cars. A sense of terrible sadness about this place, and yet also obviously someone that enjoyed a bit of fun. So much family feel to this place, and the little boy picture still with quite a strong dominant position in the house. A person that is very, very close to their family indeed. And so this is Dodi's office, where he worked. His desk, where he's obviously busy, and I'm very interested to see the toys on the floor as well. So, obviously Dodi was also a man that liked to have a bit of fun, definitely. And I'm sure that must have been one of the things that Diana must have loved about him. I think shows many of the cheerful sides of a person's personality, and yet at the same time a very sad vibration to this room. A place where his father and family would mourn, I'm sure. Dodi's flat I found a little bit disturbing in some ways, because it was with the music playing in the background of the Quran, the atmosphere of the place, of everything is just as it was before. It was very touching. It's nice that it's there as a memory, and I'm sure the family get great comfort going there to feel their connection with the presence of the spirit of Dodi. And although not there all the time, I feel when the need is there, Dodi's spirit is certainly in that very luxurious flat.
So Craig Hamilton Parker felt the warmth and spirit of Dodi there in his apartment. Incidentally, while Princess Diana was at Kensington Palace, she too felt the remnants of souls who'd been there before her.
When I first met Diana, she was at an all-time low. And she really desperately needed healing, and I was there to give it for her.
After healing Diana physically, Simone helped Diana heal her home.
One of the first things Diana asked me to do when I went to Kensington Palace was to do a clearance there, which was to get rid of all the bad energies and the dross, the emotional dross that was hanging around, and any bad spirits that might have been lurking in odd corners.
Diana's natural curiosity and perhaps her natural abilities led her to seek out Simone's help in developing her own healing skills.
And one day we were talking about everything, and she said to me, I wish I could heal. I said, but you can. And she said, okay, teach me. Then after that, I said to her, it's going to be a lot of hard work and a lot of discipline. And she said, I can do it. I said, okay, we'll try it. It took about 1.5 years for me to teach Diana how to heal. And what I was teaching her was to use the visualizations to channel her energies properly. Diana was a natural healer. She was phenomenal. She's the only person that I know of and that I've seen in the public eye who has used their power to help people with no benefit to themselves whatsoever. She didn't do it for any kudos for her. She shone little lights in the dark corners of the world and gave people an awareness of things they didn't know.
Here was a vibrant woman who was not going to just give up and quietly disappear out into the country somewhere on a stipend and bring up the boys very quietly and say, oh no, I mustn't speak, I mustn't do this. I mean, this was a very vibrant woman.
It is very interesting to be in the situation of meeting a very, very famous person, an icon. And of course, in a way, although I had done other celebrities' charts, there was no one like the Princess of Wales. And there was a degree of trepidation before I saw her, because obviously I wanted to do well, and I cared that the information that I gave her was going to be useful, insightful, and accurate. And before I got there, I was apprehensive. But the moment I was there and we were at work together, all of that absolutely vanished. And I just set to work. I was there nearly 4 hours that first time. It was apparent that Prince Charles knew of my meeting with Diana and had encouraged it. And through a second-hand telephone call, I was told that things were much appreciated.
I was delighted when I was performing in Private Lives at the Aldwych Theatre that Diana not only came to see me in the play, but stopped by to say hello to the whole cast and chat afterwards. Apparently she was a fan. But Diana also admired other prominent women, in particular Margaret Thatcher, Madonna, and Mother Teresa. At first, it would seem that these three women have nothing in common. But when you consider that they're all the most dominant women in their respective fields, politics, entertainment, and religion, it's easy to understand Diana's admiration for them.
I once asked Diana who were the people in the world that she most admired. And she said to me, Margaret Thatcher, Madonna, and Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And she never got to really meet Madonna, but she did get to know and meet Mother Teresa. And she felt a real empathy for her because Mother Teresa dealt with those people who were at the last few hours, days of life. And Diana really struck up a chord and had a real sense of fellow feeling with this charismatic nun.
When I arrived, she was in her dressing gown, in her bare feet, because she loved to run around in her bare feet. And she was happy that I came, but was also very curious to learn all about acupuncture. And whoever I'm treating, I always explain what I'm doing and where it started and a little bit the history of acupuncture. And for her, she was very excited because it was something new. And that's where our trip started. From the very first day, and I wrote it in my diary, I said, Diana is destined for great things. And of course, Mother Teresa had started her congregation in our house, in the house that I was actually living in. But it had happened before I arrived. Nevertheless, we had a close association with Mother Teresa. And when I talked about Mother Teresa and my being in India and revealed to her that I had been a nun for 20 years, she absolutely loved the whole concept of it and couldn't wait to meet Mother Teresa. Princess Diana, from that first contact with Mother Teresa, was totally taken by the whole system, and her love for the little children really started there. She had a capacity to understand people at a glance. And just to see Diana enfold in her arms these little children and their happiness and hers.
Through Una, Diana found a calling in compassion for the sick and dying.
Diana wanted me to tell the world who she really was and not who they had perceived her as. The real Diana for me was a Diana who was like everybody else. She was not separate from the people on the street, and she was never happier when she could communicate with them and be herself. And she was herself when she was with the children.
I once asked her, why don't you focus on people like who are recovering from strokes? And she said, no, what really enthuses me and what really interests me are people at the end of their journey, as opposed to people halfway through their journey. So this was a really felt belief. It wasn't just something for show or for the cameras. She would go privately, very often privately, to hospitals, to see people, just to visit wards. And I remember that she would see, say, for example, AIDS patients, people who were just at their last few hours of life, and she would spend time with them. And then in the same hospital, she would go upstairs to the maternity ward to look at the newborn babies, to get that sense of the cycle of life, and she would come away rejuvenated and refreshed and spiritually invigorated. Diana's appeal and influence was quite profound, not just about landmines, but about AIDS. I mean, she pioneered the whole notion of making people aware of AIDS and the fact that it wasn't a plague, that you wouldn't catch it by shaking someone's hands. And quite recently I was in South Africa, and I was talking to a very good friend of Nelson Mandela, who was in jail with him at the time. And they were put next to people with AIDS when they were in jail, and they were very wary about that. And they said that when they saw Diana with these AIDS patients, they then themselves, Nelson Mandela and his fellow prisoners, embraced these AIDS patients. And as a result, they had a profound effect on him. That's just one little example of her far-reaching ability to change people's hearts and people's minds. And she was sincere, because she did acknowledge that she did have a real stature in the world.
I was absolutely devastated when I heard of Diana's death. It's hard to imagine any other princess, or for that matter any other person, who was so loved and admired by not only her own people, but the entire world. And her loss was felt by people everywhere. Is it possible that with Diana's faith in spirituality that there may have been warning signs? Could Diana have known what to expect? Penny Thornton gives us the story of a couple of interesting dreams that were shared with the late princess.
In 1989, I had two very big dreams in the Jungian sense about the royal family and about the Princess of Wales. The first one, I remember Her Majesty the Queen sitting at her desk, a window behind her, giving a somber message to the nation. Diana and Charles figured in this. They were in the same room, and there was an explosion, and the only thing left on the stage, as it were, was a car seat, and it was smoky. And so that was the first dream I had, very powerful. The second was very complicated, and it involved Diana coming to see me on the white sands. We were in a rather strange place where there were white sands and black sails. It was very mythical in many ways. The dream progressed, and she talked to me about France. And then I saw William, much older, actually in a chair in my then house, and he said to me, we lost complete radio contact with them for a while. And I then sort of saw an event from a distance, and it was two black cars, I think a white van, and two motorcycles disappearing along. I can't say whether it was a tunnel, but I'm working from memory here. But my last thought as I came into consciousness, I was saying, isn't anyone going to do anything about this? So it was very vivid, and as things panned out, some 9 years later, it was a graphic representation of what it was. And there are many features of that dream: France, Egypt, many interesting connections that, of course, only came to light once the event had happened. Diana phoned me on the receipt of these dreams, and it was very interesting, her response, because she didn't, of course, have any idea what the motorbikes and any of that was all about. But she did feel that a reference I'd made to a person called Peter, who was in France and going to have plastic surgery, she did really, that sounded a chord within her. And she felt, and she came up with this statement, that she felt it related to her own past life as a Christian martyr.
I was in Scotland at the Edinburgh Festival, which is an annual arts festival, and I was woken up in the early hours of the morning and told that Diana had died, and I immediately just raced for the airport and got on a plane from Edinburgh down to London. And I remember the plane was very quiet, and a Frenchman recognised me on the flight, and he wrote something on his newspaper, and it said, "I want to apologise on behalf of all the French people for what has happened." And it was one of the most poignant moments in an extremely touching and moving week.
That year, the year she died, I'd actually written a couple of articles and gone into newspapers about the fact that I felt that she was going under intense criticism. There's this feature of her chart. She was under attack. I actually used those words, under attack. And February and August of that year were the most potent times. And I was returning from New York to London on the red-eye. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, the lights were switched on in the plane, and the pilot, the captain, said, "I have some very sad news for all of you," and gave us the information. And I mean, it's very difficult to hear anything on a plane because there's so much noise anyway, but it did seem as though everything was completely silent, that everyone was in a dreadful state of shock. And by the time I landed at Heathrow, there were already 2 news teams standing waiting for me to come out. I mean, I remember thinking, how did anyone get all this information so quickly?
I was in London at the funeral around that time. And you saw the pictures, we all saw around the world, the pictures of people bringing the bouquets to the park. And there was just, I'll tell you, there was a point in that city of London where it went just quiet on that day. It just went so quiet. It was as if the words were all gone and no one could speak. And just everybody there, and I think in this country too, were just thinking of this beautiful and tragic and flawed young woman who had just been snatched away from us.
It was a shock to me personally, a great shock. And in the second beat, there was the understanding it was all there. Astrologically, it was all there.
I saw Diana the person, not Diana the princess. And Diana the person is completely different to her public persona. The real Diana was a lovely, very vulnerable, very naive woman with a brilliant sense of humour. And she was very sensitive. And she had to have the criticism to make her into a stronger person. Because if you look at the difference between the photos, say from 95, this is Diana looking at the floor wherever she went, to Diana who had built herself up, was eating properly, had the confidence to look straight ahead and face the world.
Privately, she may have felt a very lowly sense of self, but she was very much aware that as a princess, she had power, and she was possibly the most powerful princess in history.
Clearly, years after her death, Diana, the Princess of Wales, continues to touch all of those who knew her, and the rest of us who felt as if we did. As you've heard during the last hour, her closest friends and associates have proclaimed Diana a role model for the ages. But her spirit and character are perhaps best defined by her own words, collected here in honor of her memory. I'm Joan Collins, and thank you for watching.
Diana was going through what she called the dark ages, and at a stage when she really needed some consolation and a real sense of self.
The first meeting with Diana was, and still obviously lives in my memory, etched very strongly. Diana was a Sun Cancerian, and Cancer is a very motherly, nurturing, creative, a little manipulative, sidestepping kind of sign. Her moon was in the sign of Aquarius, which gave us a much more kind of sparky and quirky side to her nature. It also revealed how interested she was in humanitarian issues. In fact, it was the moon in Aquarius that made her very emotionally unstable.
From our own research, there are as many as 5 attempted suicides. Diana tried to kill herself. Whether there were 5 or 3 or 2 or 1, who knows? But I mean, there were, by our count, at least 2.
And during that time that we were together, and the subsequent time, one of the things that we really did discuss was the idea that her suffering was great, and that one of the ways to deal with that is to go out and help people who are suffering.
She developed bulimia nervosa. She was becoming a wreck, but yet she held it together. She held it together. The woman was strong.
Her spiritual interest was a quest for understanding and knowledge, that it was difficult for her to perhaps gain enough of that knowledge and wisdom to be able to turn aspects of her life around. Well, she was too young. I mean, she didn't have long enough.
I think that her astrological readings gave her an awful lot of comfort and a source of strength.
In 1936, Edward, the King of England, gave up the throne to be with the woman he loved. After his abdication, he retained the title Duke of Windsor, and he and the twice-divorced American socialite Wallis Simpson moved into the Windsor estate in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris. Una Toffolo, an acupuncturist and natural healer, was asked to care for the former monarch in his final...
Very effectively.
She had that kind of magnetism that just fascinated everyone, and everyone fell under her spell. You couldn't help being fascinated by her. Someone said after her death, "We won't see the likes of her pass this way again."
I don't think Diana tried to escape from anything in her life except the press.
She just wanted to be anonymous.
Her father was a great friend of mine. I know him for a long time ago, and I know Diana when she was a child. And she always he'd bring her over here and buy her toys, buy her clothes. As when her mother left her, she was really completely lost, you know, as a child, 6 years old, you know, when you have your mother walk away, you have a brother and another 2 sisters. It's very difficult, you know, for a child to lose the most important part, you know, of your livelihood, you know. But the father was a great father, really. He looked after her and just, you know, I think she was really basically missing nothing. And her relation with her mother was non-existent at all, because if you are a mother and you leave your kid, you don't care about your children. First, at all, she have no relation whatsoever with the mother. She's very spiritual, very great believer in God. And her life basically always for good causes, for things which she can believe. She relieved the suffering, she relieved the sick, she relieved the handicapped. You know, it's a tremendous gift, you know, she have. And I think this is the way, because, as I say, she, in spite she come from aristocracy, but she was very, very nicely brought up, you know, and not spoiled. And this give her the touch of real, how she see other people suffering, how she see...
...to her to tell us more about this fascinating lady.
Diana never gave me any instruction whatsoever about how to treat her, except for one thing.
Astrologer and author Penny Thornton.
I had been given the information before I arrived that I was to curtsy and to say, "Good morning, Your Royal Highness." And the minute I said that and did that, she said, "Oh, please don't do that, just call me Diana."
However bad the day had been, she always maintained her sense of humour.
Andrew Morton, author of Diana, Her True Story.
And it was always a self-deprecating sense of humour, and it was never unkind, never cutting. It was always friendly and pleasant. And that's what I always liked about her, that however bad it had been, she would, at the end of the day, start smiling.
We've all read what Princess Diana was like, but the tabloids are often unkind to celebrities, and this was especially true of the Princess of Wales.
But she made sure that she knew what the tabloids were doing, and she knew that it was a two-way street.
She said, "That's me surrounded by 2,500 photographers."
She knew how to work the cameras. Now, paparazzi, of course, we've all heard the stories of how they can be very, very annoying, and they can at times be very oppressive.
And she said, you know, the old adage of spot the balls, this is spot the Diana.
All right, what about not breaking the law? What about just being annoying? Well, unfortunately, there's no law against being annoying. And paparazzi can be annoying.
She often said, "I would love to walk down the streets of Paris on my own without being recognised." And that was what she always wanted.
We went out and they're just so many photographers. You'd think they'd have something better to do with their lives.
We need pictures. And Diana knew this, and she knew it was a power that she had, because, of course, she was more than just a public figure. She was a beautiful figure. She was gorgeous. She looked great on camera.
All the way through her adult life, she'd been like a prisoner in an open prison. She'd been followed by the paparazzi, by the police, and by the press, and by the public. Everything she did was watched and criticised.
And Diana took control of it.
The poor, which they can look after their kids, that they can't get their children to hospitals, they can, you know, all these humanitarian causes which relieve suffering, you know, whatever the cause is. And her believing God and her spiritual, you know, inside as a person, all the time she asked guidance from psychic, from you know, people who really seeing the futures, you know, all this type of things. She a great believer on that.
Diana, the person, was very different from Diana the image. The image was this very glossy, glamorous individual. Well, she was.
I think Princess Diana took the very best of fashion. It was never anything gimmicky or very peculiar, but her evening clothes were magnificent always. And I think that she got herself in a little bit of trouble because she started wearing Paris fashions and everything, and I think the English industry, they told her to please wear English designers' clothes.
But the Diana in private was someone who would wake up in the morning full of beans and then by lunchtime feeling very down. I think you've got to see Diana in the 1980s as a woman who was lost. She felt alone, she felt neglected, she felt that the whole royal system was against her. She felt almost like a prisoner of the palace, and her marriage was going nowhere. She suspected that Prince Charles was seeing the other woman in his life, Camilla Parker Bowles, and those suspicions proved to be absolutely accurate. And in that kind of dark place, she turned to all kinds of people, astrologers, psychics, clairvoyants, all kinds of new age therapists, for some kind of answer.
She said, I've been to see somebody else for a therapy that's supposed to be really good, and they strap fossils on your legs. I said, since when was fossils that are millions of years old a step forward? That's going back a hell of a long time. I said, you either progress or you regress. You can't have it both ways.
Penny Thornton was one of the first astrologers that Diana consulted, and I think she came at a time when
interrupting programmes to tell you that Diana, Princess of Wales, is gravely ill. A couple were apparently being pursued by paparazzi on motorbikes.
Still sealed off. You have the flashing.
Seeing the debris at the moment, Stephen.
That's the car. Confirmed reports suggest he has concussion.
The Press Association, a short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death.
I have a terrible feeling that this is true.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris.
I saw Diana the person, not Diana the princess.
I think she was looking for love, and as she had been rejected so many times over, it had left her spirit desolate.
Just recently in England, she was voted the second most famous Briton ever.
I don't remember anybody ever being like Diana, where the whole world was just, they couldn't get enough about her.
She was very much aware that as a princess, she had power.
She relieved the suffering, she relieved the sick, she relieved the handicap, you know, it's a tremendous gift, you know, she have.
The royal family never understood was how to handle the press.
Hello, I'm Joan Collins, and thank you for joining us. What you're about to see is an exceptional tribute to the beautiful English Rose who was so sadly taken from us. During this program, we'll explore the real Princess of Wales, her care for the poor, the children in need, and her deep spiritual relationship with the world. I had the privilege of meeting Princess Diana in person on several occasions, and I was struck by her unique personality. So I'm going to share with you some of my recollections and thoughts. In order to get a clearer picture of who the real Diana was, the Diana that surfaced only in the comfort of trusted friends, we've asked a few of the people closest